Naomi Carter. The voice echoed across the auditorium, smooth and official, like it belonged to a world I was never supposed to reach. And for a second, I didn't move. I just stood there with my hands trembling at my sides, staring at the stage lights that felt too bright, too white, like they were exposing every part of me I'd spent years trying to hold together. And I remember thinking, not about the diploma waiting for me, not about the years it took to get here, but about the empty space beside me, the place where someone was supposed to stand, someone who was supposed to say my name before they called it out loud, someone who never existed in my life until one night changed everything, and suddenly the room faded, the applause blurred into noise, and I was back there again, back in the rain, back in the cold, back in the moment I met him, the night the city felt too big and I felt too small, the night I found her. It was just after 11 p.m., the kind of night where the air sticks to your skin. And the streetlights hum like they're tired of shining. I had just finished my shift at the community center, my sneakers soaked from walking sick blocks because the bus never showed up, my hoodie pulled tight around me like it could protect me from something I didn't even understand yet. And that's when I heard it, not loud, not dramatic, just a soft sound, like someone trying not to be heard. And I almost kept walking. I almost told myself it wasn't my problem, but something in me stopped, something quiet but stubborn. And I turned toward the alley, the kind of narrow space people avoid, the kind that smells like rain and forgotten things. And there she was sitting on the ground, knees pulled to her chest, maybe 6 years old, maybe younger, her small hands gripping the edge of her sleeve like it was the only thing keeping her together, her eyes wide, but empty in a way that didn't belong to a child. And I felt my chest tighten, not from fear, but from recognition, because I knew. That look, I had worn it before. Hey, I whispered, lowering myself slowly like sudden movement might break something fragile. You're okay. I didn't know if that was true, but I said it anyway because sometimes words are all you have. She didn't answer, didn't move, just stared at me like she was waiting for me to disappear. And maybe I should have. Maybe that would have been safer, easier, but instead I reached out just enough for her to see, not touching, just offering, and after a second that felt longer than it should, her fingers moved barely, but enough to tell me she was still there, still fighting, and that's when I heard the footsteps, slow, controlled, not rushed, not uncertain, the kind of footsteps that don't ask permission to exist, and the air shifted like the city itself was holding its breath. I looked up, and he was there, standing at the edge of the alley like he had always belonged in the shadows, tall, composed, dressed in a way that didn't match this place, like he had stepped out of a different world entirely, his eyes finding the girl first. Then me, sharp, unreadable. And when he spoke, his voice was low, steady, the kind that didn't need to be loud to be heard. Give her to me, and something inside me reacted before I could think, before I could weigh consequences or understand who he was. I shifted closer to her instead, my hand hovering protectively near her shoulder. Not like this, I said, my voice softer than his, but it didn't shake, not the way I expected it to. And for a moment, everything went still, the rain, the noise, even my own heartbeat, because I knew without knowing. How? That I had just said no to a man who wasn't used to hearing it. And somehow, that mattered more than anything else in that moment. He did not step closer, not immediately. And somehow that made it worse, because it meant he did not need to rush. It meant he already knew how this would end, his presence filling the narrow alley in a way that made the walls feel tighter, the air heavier, and I could feel the girl beside me press closer without even looking, like her body recognized something dangerous long before her mind could name it. And I kept my hand where she could see it, steady, open, because I needed her to know I was not leaving, not yet, not like everyone else probably had. You should not be here, he said finally, his voice still calm, still controlled. But there's something under it now, something sharper like patience wearing thin, and I swallowed, my throat suddenly dry. But I did not move, neither should she. I answered, and the words surprised me as much as they might have surprised him, because I was not brave, not really. I just knew what it felt like to be small and invisible and waiting for someone to choose you. And I was not going to walk away from that. Not this time. His eyes flicked down to the girl again, studying her, not cold, not cruel, just calculating in a way that made my chest tighten, like he was measuring something only he understood. Naomi Carter, he said, and my breath caught because I had not told him my name, had not said anything that should have given me away, and yet he spoke it like it belonged to him, like everything else probably did. 17. Works evenings at the community center on 8th Street, walks home alone because the late bus is unreliable. Each detail landed heavier than the last. Not loud, not threatening, just factual, and somehow that made it worse because it meant he had been watching or someone had, and I felt a flicker of something I did not want to name. Fear maybe, or something deeper, something that said I'd stepped into a world I did not understand. You know a lot, I said quietly, trying to keep my voice steady, even as my fingers curled slightly. Closer to the girl's sleeve, and for the first time, something shifted in his expression, not enough to call it emotion, but enough to make me realize he was paying attention to me. Not just as an obstacle, but as something unexpected. I know what matters, he replied. And then his gaze softened, just barely when it returned to her. Her name is Lila, he added. Like that explained everything. Like that should be enough for me to hand her over without question. And I looked down at her. Really looked this time, at the way her shoulders stayed tight, even when no one was touching her, at the way her eyes flicked between us like she was trying to understand who would win, and something inside me refused to. Let that be the only choice she had, Lila. I repeated softly, testing the name, giving it back to her like it belonged to her, not him, and her fingers tightened for a second, just a second, but it was enough to tell me she heard me, enough to tell me she was still here. She is coming with me, he said, more firmly now, not louder, but final in a way that suggested this was not a conversation he usually had twice. And I shook my head before I could stop myself, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. She is not ready, I said, and the silence that followed felt different this time, heavier, like the city itself had leaned in to listen because I had crossed another line, one I could not see but definitely felt. And for a long moment, he just stood there, watching me, watching her like he was deciding something, like this moment mattered more than it should. And then he did something I did not expect, something that made the air shift again. He took a step back, not away from us, but enough to change the space between us, enough to say he was not going to take her by force, not tonight. Then you come too, he said, and the words were simple, almost quiet, but they carried weight, choice, consequence, everything wrapped into one sentence, and I froze because I realized this was not an offer. Not really. It was a door opening into something I could not take back. Something that would change everything if I stepped through it. And behind me, I felt Lila's small hand tighten again, not pulling away, not letting go, just holding on, and somehow that made the decision feel like it had already been made. I should have said no. I know that now. I should have taken Lila's hand and walked the other way, back toward the streetlights, back toward the version of my life that made sense, even if it was small and uncertain. But instead I stood there in that narrow alley with rain dripping from the edge of my hood and something in my chest refusing to let go, because leaving her felt wrong in a way I could not explain, and staying felt like stepping into something I could not survive. And somehow I chose the second one. Where are we going? I asked, my voice quieter now, not weak, just careful, like the answer mattered more than I was ready for. And he watched me for a second before answering, like he was deciding how much truth I could handle. Somewhere safe, he said, and the word safe landed differently coming from him, heavier, like it carried rules I did not understand. And I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because nothing about this felt safe. Not the alley, not the man standing in front of me. Not the way he knew my name, but Lila's hand tightened again. And that was enough. It was always enough, so I nodded once, small but certain, and he turned without another word, like he already expected me to follow. Like this decision had been made the moment I refused to give her up, and we stepped out of the alley into the open street where the city kept moving like nothing had changed. Cars passing, people talking, the world continuing in a way that felt almost unfair because mine had just shifted in a way I could not undo. A black SUV waited at the curb, engine running, lights soft against the wet pavement, and everything about it looked expensive in a way I had only seen from a distance. The kind of thing that did not belong near places like the community center or the blocks I walked every night. And for a second I hesitated, just 1 second, because stepping into that car felt like crossing a line I would not be able to step back from. And he noticed, of course he did, his eyes flicking toward me with that same unreadable calm. You could still walk away, he said, and the words should have made it easier, should have given me an exit, but they did not, because I looked down at Lila and saw the way she stayed close to me instead of him, the way her fingers held onto my sleeve like I was the only thing she trusted in that moment. And I knew walking away was not really an option. Not for me. Not anymore. So I opened the door, the leather seat cold against my legs as I climbed in, pulling her with me, and the door closed with a soft, final sound that felt louder than it should have, sealing us inside a space that did not feel like mine, the city lights blurring through the tinted windows as the car began to move, and for a while no one spoke. Not me, not him, not even Lila, just the quiet hum of the engine and the steady rhythm of rain against glass. And I became aware of everything all at once, the way my heart had not slowed down, the way my hands still felt tense, the way he sat across from us with a kind of stillness that did not come from comfort but from control, like he did not need to move to be in charge of the space. And I realized something then, something that settled deep in my chest. This was his world, not just the car, not just the street, but everything beyond it. And I just stepped into it without knowing the rules. Why me? I asked finally, the question slipping out before I could stop it, because it did not make sense. None of it did. And he looked at me, really looked this time, not past me, not through me, but at me like he was trying to understand something he had not expected. Because she chose you, he said, and the answer was so simple it almost did not feel like an answer at all. But when I looked down at Lila and saw the way her head had leaned slightly against my arm, the way her breathing had softened just enough to tell me she felt something close to safe, I understood. Not everything, not him, not this world, but that one thing. And somehow that was enough to keep me there as the city disappeared behind us, and whatever came next moved closer with every mile. The car did not slow down until the city lights thinned out, until the buildings turned quieter, taller, more distant from everything I recognized, and I realized we'd been driving for almost 20 minutes without stopping, without anyone asking if I was okay, without anyone explaining anything, and somehow that silence said more than words ever could, because it meant this was normal to him, this movement between worlds, this control, this quiet authority that did not need permission. And I sat there with Lila pressed gently against my side, her small weight grounding me in a way nothing else could, her breathing steady now, softer than before, like something inside her had decided this place, this moment was not as dangerous as it had felt before, and that should have comforted me. But it did not entirely, because I did not understand why she felt safe here, not with him, not in this world that felt so far from anything I knew. The car finally turned through a set of tall iron gates that opened without a sound, like they had been waiting for him, and the driveway stretched ahead longer than I expected, lined with lights that glowed low and warm against the rain, leading to a house that did not look real at first, too large, too perfect, the kind of place I had only seen in movies or from the outside of neighborhoods I did not belong to, and I felt something tighten in my chest again, not fear exactly, but something close, something that reminded me how far I had stepped from my own life. The car came to a smooth stop, and before I could reach for the door, it opened from the outside, a man in a dark coat standing there, not speaking, just nodding slightly like this was routine, like I was expected, and I hesitated again, just for a second, because stepping out meant this was real, not just a drive, not just a moment, but something bigger, something that would not disappear when I closed my eyes. "It is okay," he said, not to me, but to Lila, his voice softer now, different from before, like he was. Try to reach her in a way he did not know how. And she did not move toward him, not even a little. She stayed where she was, her hand still lightly gripping my sleeve, and that small refusal shifted something in the air, something I could not name. But I felt it, the difference between what he expected and what actually happened, and I stepped out first, pulling her gently with me, the ground solid beneath my feet, but unfamiliar, the air quieter here, like the city had been left behind, completely. And for a moment none of us moved. Not me, not him, not the man by the door, just the sound of rain and the soft hum of something distant. And then he turned, walking toward the entrance without looking back, like he already knew I would follow, like that choice had already been made. And maybe it had, because I did follow, not because I trusted him, not because I understood anything about this place, but because Lila did not let go, And that was enough. Inside, the house was even quieter than outside, the kind of quiet that felt intentional, like every sound had been measured and controlled, the floors polished, the lights soft, everything in its place in a way that made me suddenly aware of how out of place I felt. My damp hoodie, my worn sneakers, the reality of who I was standing in a space that did not reflect it at all. And I almost stepped back, almost told myself this was a mistake, but then Lila shifted closer again, and I felt her fingers press just slightly tighter into my sleeve, like she was asking without words, "Do not leave." And I could not. Not now. Not when she needed something I understood better than anything else. And he stopped at the center of the room, turning to face us again, his eyes moving from her to me, not cold, not warm, just searching like he was trying to understand something he had never needed to before. "She will have a room upstairs," he said, his voice returning to that controlled calm. But there was something else there now, something quieter, something uncertain. "And you," he paused, just briefly, like the next part mattered more than he expected. "You can stay too." And I blinked, not because I did not hear him, but because I did not understand why, because this was not how the world worked, not mine, not his, not any world I knew. And yet here I was, standing in a place I did not belong, being offered something I did not trust, holding on to a child who had chosen me for reasons I could not explain. And for the first time since I stepped into that alley, I realized this was not just about her anymore. This was about him too. And whatever this was, whatever was starting here, it was something none of us fully understood yet. I did not answer him right away, not because I did not hear what he said, but because I did not understand it, not fully the idea of staying here, in a place that felt like it belonged to someone else's life, someone with money and power and rules I could not see. It did not fit with anything I had ever known, and yet Lila did not move away. She stayed close, her small fingers still wrapped in the fabric of my sleeve, like letting go would undo something fragile she had just found. And I realized this was not about comfort. It was about trust, and she had given that to me without asking, without explaining, just quietly, the way people do when they have no other choice. "She should sleep." I said finally, my voice softer now, not challenging in the way it had before, because this was different. This was not about stopping him. It was about protecting her in a way he did not seem to understand yet. And for a moment, he just looked at me, like he was measuring the shift in my tone, like he noticed the difference between resistance and care. And then he nodded once. A small movement, but deliberate, like it mattered more than it seemed. "There's a room prepared," he said, and he gestured toward the staircase, not ordering, not forcing, just indicating. And I turned, guiding Lila gently with me. Each step up the stairs feeling quieter than the last, like the house itself was listening, like every movement mattered here in a way I could not explain. The hallway upstairs stretched long and still, doors closed, lights dim, everything controlled, everything precise, and I became aware again of how different this place was from anything I knew. No noise from neighbors, no distant traffic, no voices through thin walls, just silence, the kind that makes you aware of your own breathing. And when we reached the room, I paused at the doorway, not because I was unsure, but because it felt too perfect, too arranged, a bed already made, soft blankets folded neatly, a small lamp casting warm light across clean surfaces, like someone had anticipated this moment before it happened. And that thought unsettled me more than anything else, because it meant this world did not react, it prepared, it planned, it controlled. "You can stay here," I whispered to Lila, crouching slightly, so I could meet her eyes, not rushing, not pushing, just giving her space to choose. And she looked at the room, then back at me. Then slowly, carefully, she stepped inside, her hand still holding onto mine, and I stayed with her, sitting at the edge of the bed while she climbed up beside me. Her movements small, but deliberate, like she was testing something, testing whether this was real, whether it would last. And I stayed still, letting her settle, letting her decide how close she wanted to be. And after a few seconds, she leaned slightly against my arm again. Not fully, just enough to tell me she was still there, still holding on. And I felt something in my chest shift, something quiet but strong, the kind of feeling that does not ask permission. It just exists. And I reached over, pulling the blanket gently around her shoulders, careful not to startle her, careful not to break whatever fragile trust she had given me. "You are safe," I whispered again, the same words from before, And I did not know if they were true. Not in this place, not in this world, but I knew they were true with me. And that was enough for now. Her eyes stayed open for a moment longer, watching me, searching maybe, and then slowly, almost reluctantly, they closed, her breathing evening out in a way that told me she had finally let go of something. Not everything, not yet, but enough to rest. And I sat there longer than I needed to, longer than I should have, just listening, just making sure she stayed that way, because leaving felt wrong, even if I knew I could not stay forever. And when I finally stood, carefully, quietly, I hesitated at the door, my hand resting lightly against the frame as I looked back at her, small against the bed, wrapped in something that looked like comfort but still felt temporary. And I stepped out, closing the door just enough to leave it slightly open, not fully shut, because something told me she might need to see the light. And when I turned, he was there, standing at the end of the hallway. Not close, not far, just watching. And for the first time, there was no command in his presence, no demand, just a question that neither of us had spoken yet. And I realized then that whatever this was, whatever had started between us in that alley, it had not ended, it had only just begun. He did not speak right away. And that silence stretched between us in a way that felt heavier than anything he could have said, because it was not empty. It was full of something unspoken, something unfamiliar, and I realized he was waiting, not for an answer, not for permission, but for something else entirely, something he did not know how to ask for. And I stayed where I was, halfway between the door and the hallway, my hand still lightly resting against the frame like I had not fully decided whether to leave or go back. She is asleep, I said quietly, my voice softer now. Not guarded, not challenging, just stating a truth that felt important, and his eyes shifted slightly, not in surprise, but in recognition, like that outcome mattered more than he had expected. She does not sleep easily, he replied, and there was something different in his tone, something less controlled, less certain, like he was admitting something he did not usually say out loud. And I felt that same shift again, that small crack in the version of him I'd seen so far, the man who knew everything, who controlled everything, who did not hesitate. She felt safe, I said, and the words came out before I could stop them, simple, direct, but they carried weight because I knew what they meant. And for a moment, he just looked at me, really looked this time, not assessing, not calculating, but searching, like he was trying to understand how that could be true, how something he could not give had come so easily to someone else. And I felt something tighten in my chest again, not fear, not exactly, but something close to it, something that told me this was not just about Lila anymore. This was about him too. You think that is enough, he said after a second, not as a question, but as a statement that carried doubt underneath it. And I shook my head slightly, stepping away from the door now, closing the distance between us just enough to make the conversation feel real. It is where it starts, I answered, and the hallway seemed even quieter then, like the house itself was listening, like this moment mattered more than either of us expected. And he exhaled slowly, a small movement, barely noticeable, but it changed something. It made him look less like the man from the alley, less like the one who could command a room without speaking, and more like someone who did not have all the answers. And that realization unsettled me more than anything else had so far, because it meant I was seeing something real, something human. And that was harder to ignore. She lost her parents, he said finally, the words controlled, measured, but there was something underneath them, something that did not belong to control. I did not ask how. I did not need to, because it was not the kind of question that needed an answer right now. It was the kind that carried its own weight. And I nodded once, slowly letting the silence hold the rest. And you think I cannot give her what she needs? He continued. And this time there was something sharper in his voice, not anger, but something close to it, something defensive, and I met his gaze without looking away, because this mattered more than anything else we had said so far. I think you do not know how yet, I said, and the words hung between us, simple but undeniable. And for a second I thought I had crossed a line again, one I would not be able to step back from, but he did not react the way I expected. He did not shut down, did not turn away. Instead, he stayed there, still absorbing it, like he was not used to being spoken to like this, like no one had ever. Said something so direct, without fear, and that thought settled heavily in my mind, because it meant this world he lived in did not leave room for honesty, Only obedience, only silence, and somehow I had stepped into it and broken that without realizing. Then you will show me, he said, and the words were quiet, almost too quiet, but they carried something stronger than anything he had said before. Not a command, not a demand, but something else, something closer to trust, and I blinked, caught off guard by the shift, by the weight of what he was asking without fully saying it. Because this was not about staying for a night anymore, not about helping her fall asleep. This was something bigger, something that would take time, something that would change more than just her, and I felt it then, that pull between walking away and staying, between protecting myself and stepping into something I did not understand. And for the first time since I met him, I did not answer right away because this choice felt different, heavier, like it would define everything that came next. I should have walked away then. I felt it in that moment. The weight of his words settling into something real, something that could not be undone once I said yes, because this was not just about helping a child sleep or staying for a night. This was stepping into his world, learning its rules, carrying something that did not belong to me. And I knew better than that. I'd spent my whole life avoiding places like this, people like him, power that came with silence and shadows and things no one explained out loud. And yet I did not move. I stood there in that quiet hallway with his eyes on me, waiting, not pushing, not forcing, just waiting a way that made the decision feel like it mattered more than anything else. You do not even know me, I said finally, my voice low but steady, because that truth felt important, because it reminded both of us that this was not simple, that I was not someone he could just bring into his life and expect to stay, and for a second, something. Almost like a smile touched his expression, not warm, not soft, but real in a way I had not seen before. I know enough, he replied, and that answer should have unsettled me more than it did. But instead it made me think about what enough meant to him, what he had seen, what he had decided without asking me. And that realization stirred something in me, something stronger than fear, something closer to resolve. No, I said, and the word landed between us like a line drawn clearly for the first time. And he did not react immediately. He did not interrupt. He did not correct me. He just watched. And that gave me space, enough space to keep going. I will not stay here like this. I continued, my voice gaining strength, not louder, but firmer because this mattered. I am not part of your world. And she should not grow up thinking this is the only one she has. And there it was, the truth I had been holding on to since the alley. Since the moment I saw her sitting there alone, because this place, as safe as it looked, as controlled as it felt, it was not the kind of safe that lets you breathe. It was the kind that keeps you protected by keeping everything else out, and I could not accept that for her, not completely, not without question. His gaze sharpened slightly, not in anger, but in focus, like I had finally said something that matched what he had been thinking. And the silence that followed was different again, not heavy, not uncertain, but deliberate, like both of us were standing on opposite sides of something that needed to be crossed carefully. Then what do you suggest? He asked, and this time it was a question, not a test, not a challenge, but a real question, and that changed everything, because it meant he was listening, not just hearing, and I took a slow breath, grounding myself before answering. She needs more than a room. I said, she needs a life, a school, people who are not afraid of you. Places that do not feel like they belong to someone else. And I watched him as I spoke, watched the way each word landed, not rejected, not dismissed, just processed in a way that told me this was new for him. This way of thinking, this way of seeing beyond control. And you, I added, before I could stop myself, because it felt incomplete. Without it, you need to be part of that without owning it. And that was the line, the one that could have broken everything, the one that challenged not just his choices, but who he was. And for a moment, the air seemed to still completely, like even the house was waiting to see what he would do. And I held my ground, even as my heart pounded, because I knew this mattered, not just for me, not just for Lila, but for him too. And then he did something I did not expect again, something that shifted the entire moment. He did not argue. He did not dismiss it. He did not walk away. Instead, he nodded, once slow and deliberate like he was, accepting something he did not fully understand yet. Then we'll do it your way, he said, and the words were quiet, but they carried more weight than anything he had said before, because this was not control, not ownership. This was something else, something closer to trust. And I felt it then, that change, small but undeniable, like the world had tilted just slightly. enough to make everything that came next different from what either of us expected. Morning came quietly, not with noise or urgency, but with light, soft and slow as it slipped through the tall windows and stretched across a room that still did not feel like mine. And for a second I forgot where I was, my eyes half open, my body still caught between sleep and memory, until I felt it, the weight against my arm, small, warm, steady, and I looked down to see Lila curled beside me. Her hand still wrapped lightly around my sleeve like she had fallen asleep, holding on and never let go. And something in my chest shifted again. That same quiet pull I had felt the night before, only deeper now because it had lasted, because she had stayed, because I had stayed too, and I exhaled slowly, careful not to move too quickly, careful not to break whatever fragile calm she had found. The room was still, the kind of still that felt protected, but not suffocating, not like before, and I realized something had changed. Not in the space, but in how it felt, because now it held something else, something softer, something that had not been there before, and I sat there for a moment, just listening to her breathing, steady, even the kind of rhythm that comes from real rest, not the kind you fake when you're too tired to stay awake, and I thought about what that meant, about what it took for a child like her to reach that point, about how rare it was, and how easily it could be taken away if we were not careful. And that thought stayed with me as I slowly shifted, easing my arm free without waking her, pulling the blanket a little higher around her shoulders, making sure she stayed warm, making sure she stayed safe. Even if I was still figuring out what safe meant in a place like this, I stepped out into the hallway quietly, closing the door just enough to keep the light soft. And he was already there, not at the end of the hallway this time, but closer, standing near the window with a morning light framed him differently than the night before. Less shadow, more clarity, and for the first time I saw him without the weight of darkness around him. Not as the man from the alley, not as the one who controlled everything without speaking, but as someone who had not slept, someone who had been waiting, and that realization settled into me in a way I did not expect. She's still asleep, I said, my voice low, but there was something else in it now, something steadier, something that came from knowing I had done something right, even if I did not know what came next. And he nodded once, his eyes shifting briefly toward the door before returning to me. That does not happen often, he said, and this time there was no control in his voice, no distance, just truth, simple and unguarded, and I leaned slightly against the wall, letting that settle, letting the moment breathe instead of rushing past it. Then we do not change what worked, I replied, and he watched me again, that same focused attention, but it felt different now. Not like he was measuring me, but like he was learning, and I realized that was what this was, not control, not ownership, but something slower, something unfamiliar to him, something he did not have a name for yet. She needs routine, I continued, my voice quiet but certain. Consistency, small things that do not change, that is how she will trust this place. And he nodded again, slower this time, like he was holding on to each word, not because he had to, but because he wanted to, and that difference mattered more than anything else had so far. Then we start today, he said, and there was something in that, not urgency, not pressure, but commitment. And I felt it, that shift again, that quiet alignment between us that had not existed before, not in the alley, not in the car, not even last night. This was something new, something built on choice instead of circumstance. And I straightened slightly, meeting his gaze without hesitation this time, because I understood now, not everything, not his world, not the full weight of what I'd stepped into, but this part, this piece of it that mattered most. We start with breakfast. I said, simple, ordinary, almost small, but that was the point. And for the first time since I met him, something in his expression changed in a way I could not ignore, not a smile, not exactly, but something softer, something human, like he was beginning to understand that this simple moment, this quiet morning, was where everything would begin to change. The kitchen did not feel like the rest of the house, not as quiet, not as distant. It held a different kind of stillness, one that felt almost normal, like it had been used for something real before. And I stood there for a moment watching the sunlight stretch across the counter, the soft hum of a coffee machine in the background, the faint clink of porcelain as someone set plates down with careful precision. And it almost made me forget where I was, almost, until I felt his presence behind me. Not close, not overwhelming, just there, steady, And I turned slightly to see him standing near the doorway, not giving orders, not directing anyone, just watching like he was unsure what to do with a moment that did not require control. "She'll be hungry when she wakes up," I said, moving toward the counter without waiting for permission because this part did not belong to him, not yet, and I needed it to feel real. Simple, something we could build from. I reached for what I needed: bread, fruit, something easy, something familiar, my hands moving on instinct the way they always did at the community center, because routine mattered, because small things mattered, and I could feel his eyes on me the entire time, not intrusive, not demanding, just present, like he was trying to understand something he had never had to think about before. "You do this often," he said after a moment, his voice quieter than usual, and I nodded slightly without looking up. "Every day," I answered. Because that was the truth, because taking care of someone did not start with big gestures. It started with mornings like this, with making sure someone had something warm, something steady, something they could count on. And when I turned back toward him, I saw it. Again, that shift, that subtle change in the way he held himself, less distant, less certain, like he was stepping into something unfamiliar without knowing how to stand in it yet. "You could have left," he said, not accusing, not questioning, just stating it like a fact that still did not make sense to him. And I held his gaze for a second, not looking away this time, because I understood what he was really asking. "I still can," I replied. And the words were honest, but they did not carry the same weight they would have the night before, because something had changed, not just in him, but in me too. And he seemed to recognize that, because he did not respond right away. He just stood there, absorbing it, like he was learning the shape of a decision that was not his to make. Footsteps broke the moment, light, careful, and I turned to see Lila standing at the edge of the hallway, her eyes still heavy with sleep, her small frame hesitant, but moving forward. And for a second, everything else faded, the house, the distance, even him, because she was watching me, not him, not the room, like she was checking if I was still there. And I stepped toward her without thinking, lowering myself slightly, so she did not have to look up. "Good morning," I said softly, and she did not answer, not with words, but she moved closer, just enough, just like before, and I felt her hand find my sleeve again, lighter this time, less desperate, more certain, and that difference mattered more than anything else could have. I guided her toward the table, sitting her down gently, placing the plate in front of her, not rushing, not overwhelming her with attention, just letting her take it in at her own pace. And I glanced up once, just once, to see him watching from across the room, still silent, but something in his expression had changed again, something deeper this time, something I could not fully name until I saw it clearly, the way his gaze softened, the way his shoulders eased, just slightly, like he was seeing something he had not known he needed. And then it happened, small, almost too quiet to notice, but I heard it. I felt it, Lila's voice, barely above a whisper, fragile but real. "Naomi." And the room seemed to still completely, the sound hanging in the air like something sacred, something earned. And I froze for a second, not because I was surprised, but because I understood what it meant, how much it took for her to say that, how much trust it carried. And I looked up instinctively, not at her, but at him. And for the first time since I had met Adrian Cole, the man who controlled everything, the man who never hesitated, I saw it, clear and undeniable, the way his eyes changed, the way something broke open quietly behind them, not weakness, not loss, but something deeper, something human. And he did not look away, not from her, not from me. He just stood there still, as if the entire world had shifted in that one word. And in that moment, I understood something I had not before. This was never just about saving her. It was about giving him something he had never had, something he could not buy, could not command, could not control. And as I reached for her hand, steady and warm, I realized this was the beginning of something none of us could go back from, not because of power, not because of fear, but because for the first time it felt like we were building something real.